So a quick intro from me. My name's Nick Cadenzi. I am the client success lead here at Ziplet. So in my capacity, I work with the schools and institutions that sign up to Ziplet and provide access for all of their teachers to collect feedback from their students and be really strategic and also tactical in terms of how they use that feedback to support their students and also to support themselves in their teaching capacity as well. We've also got Cam Hodkinson with us today. He's our head of product here at Ziplet. And as I'll allude to a little bit later on, and I'm sure Cam will mention a bit himself, is actually a former teacher as well. So really has that experience of both sides of the coin. And I'm sure you'll see a lot of the sort of teaching experience that we have in Ziplet and through Cam as well really come through the product as well. So today, this is actually the first webinar that we've run at Ziplet, and it's going to be part of an ongoing series as well. So we'll really focus these in ways that can try and help you as educators across Australia and across the globe as well, enhance your understanding of your students through the power of feedback. So I'm sure, as you know, by asking thoughtful questions at the right time, student feedback is a really powerful tool to guide you as educators to be thinking a bit more about how you can be really intentional and deliberate in terms of where you allocate your time and energy and resources to help students at the class level, but also those that might need a little bit of individual support as well. So hopefully you'll be able to join us for any upcoming webinars that we are running. We'll be looking at things that are topical themes in teaching. We'll be covering things such as student feedback best practice. It's also a really good opportunity for us to share a little bit of what we've been working on with you and show you some of the new and exciting features that Cam and his team will be shortly rolling out as well. So for today, we'll be focusing on student wellbeing. So we'll be looking at what is wellbeing, why do we care about it, and how educators can reduce their own stress by being proactive with understanding the well-being of their class and their students as well. I'll then hand over to Cam. He will share some examples of the things that when he was a teacher, he wishes he would have been able to uncover through feedback if he had the right tool at the right time, and what he'd be able to do in terms of student feedback and well-being and improving that experience as well. We'll save 10 minutes at the end for Q&A. So if you do have any questions that come to mind, or if you had some burning questions coming in today's session, feel free to pop them in the chat or the Q&A function as well. And we'll get to those questions at the end. So let's get started. So first question to cover off is, what is well-being? So we know that it's something that is really competing for the focus and attention of educators around the world. We're sort of pretty certain and confident that wellbeing is one of those foundational elements and experiences of our students that really influences so many aspects of their life and their overall experience, and can be part of the mix of the ingredients that may help them reach their full potential or potentially hold them back from hitting that potential as well. So in preparing for today's webinar, I did do a little bit of research into well-being and was looking at how it might be defined. And unsurprisingly, there isn't a single definition of what well-being is, at least in an educational setting. I came across many varying descriptions, but what I did find is that when I sort of distilled a number of different definitions, they pretty much do align on a similar set of ingredients. So one description that I did come across, which I thought summarizes well-being pretty well in an educational setting, is that well-being is a holistic term that encompasses all aspects of a student's life, including their physical, social, mental, and emotional state. So it's a pretty big beast to be wrangling. Now, while that's sort of one way to describe well-being in an educational setting, what well-being means to you, or what might be important to you about well-being with your students may differ depending on your learning environment. So whether you're a primary or a high school teacher, or maybe you're in further education and looking after sort of adult students, for example, the reach or the expectations of you as a teacher and in relation to student wellbeing may differ a little bit. So how does wellbeing play a role in learning? So as I'm sure you can have experienced and thinking about that definition of wellbeing, it really does have a pretty significant impact on student academic outcomes. So students who do have a greater sense of wellbeing tend to be more likely to experience improved academic outcomes. So a bit of research that was led by Melbourne University and actually collaborated with a number of universities around Australia noted that empirical research consistently identifies that student mental wellbeing and academic achievement are both strengthened by learning environments that actively foster 5 wellbeing essentials. So those 5 essentials are autonomous motivation. So having students that actually feel intrinsically motivated by activities that they find satisfying. A sense of belonging. So when students feel that they're accepted and valued by others, their relationships, so where they can trust, can rely on or care for others or feel that others feel the same way for them. A sense of autonomy as well. So where they feel that their actions are self-chosen, self-driven, rather than being told what they need to do or what's right for them. And lastly, a sense of confidence as well. So knowing that when they're able to face a challenge, that they're able to overcome that on their own. So thinking about those, that definition of well-being and those 5 key elements as well, when there is a little bit of an imbalance in a student's well-being and it sort of tips into maybe a bit of an unhealthy range, things and factors like their behavior, their personal satisfaction, and then of course, ultimately, their academic performance can all start to deteriorate as well. So thinking about all of that, why do we actually care about well-being and why do we care about it now? So I guess one key thing about well-being as well is it doesn't necessarily mean that it's sunshine and rainbows all the time. So well-being might mean that from time to time, students do experience emotions such as sadness or fear, maybe anger, frustration, but these are all pretty normal parts of the human experience. And I'm sure as you've all experienced yourselves in the learning environment, these emotions, while they might have a negative connotation, can actually help students learn, grow and build those meaningful connections with others. So a core element of well-being and sort of being in a healthy state is to have the capacity, the skills and resources to cope with those emotions when things do get tough in a way that is both positive and constructive as well. So a few sets of skills that your students might be forming or struggling to form at the moment, particularly as the last couple of years have been really challenging, is something that we'll be focusing on today. So with that, by having a better understanding of the current state of your students' well-being across your classes or as individuals, you might actually find a few tidbits, a few bits of information that will help guide you in terms of why some students might be behaving in certain ways, and help you either help those individuals, help those classes, and be able to get to that point of full potential as quickly as possible. And so with a bit of a baseline in terms of what wellbeing is all about and perhaps why we care about it today as well. And before I do hand over to Cam to start taking us through some of his experience and how Ziplet can help you as well, I think a really key thing to emphasize at the end of all of this as well is that well-being in the classroom is sort of one point of a student's experience, but a lot of what drives a student's well-being and influences that happens outside of the classroom as well. So as a teacher, of course, you're a stakeholder in your students' well-being, but you're not an owner of their outcome. So given that intrinsic link between student well-being, their emotional outcomes, and also their academic performance, Cam will share with you some strategies to help you think about how you can proactively monitor and understand the well-being of your students and use that information to help shape and drive them into a positive direction for the betterment of you and for your students as well. So Cam, over to you. Looking forward to hearing a bit about your experience as a teacher and some of the things that you probably wish you could have done all those years ago if you had a tool like Ziplet as well.
Yeah. Thanks, Nick. Look, before I jump in, I might just preface what I'm about to dive into as being, I suppose, a way of revealing how old I am, but also some of my my history and loves and hates, but also my experiences as an educator, both in high schools and in vocational education. I want to talk a little bit about how Ziplet can really help to monitor and scale how you deal and influence well-being. But before I jump in, I want to want to take a quick journey through time and space, and this is for myself and my own memory, but also to set the scene of where some of these stories take place. And it's in a world where a very young Cristiano Ronaldo has just entered the world stage with Manchester United as a fresh-faced 18-year-old, where Arnold Schwarzenegger has just become the 38th governor of California, surprisingly, but also coining a whole new term. Where Guy Ritchie Swept Away was welcomed with open arms at the Golden Raspberry Awards for Worst Film, Worst Actor, and Worst Actress. And where 50 Cent was played in every gas station, residence, warehouse, farmhouse, hen house, outhouse, and doghouse around. It was the early 2000s, and it was the best of times and the worst of times. But it was also really early in my teaching career, and a time where I was kind of finding my feet as an educator, learning from my colleagues and peers, but starting to shape and form a view of how I felt education should roll. Sorry, Nick, do you mind just muting a little bit?
So, Lorelli, I'm just trying to pop you on mute, or if you could do that as well.
Thank you. It was a very interesting time, and at that time I was beginning my involvement in a really big regional vet program that I'll talk a little bit more about, and that's kind of the heart of the narrative that I wanted to dive into. But also, it's worth noting that we were in the infancy of good classroom technology and software. We didn't have Google Forms or Google Sheets. Well, really, we didn't have Google anything other than search. And the LMS was a pretty rudimentary beast at the institution that I was teaching at. And finally, it was a time where CSI had really normalized the use of sunglasses for dramatic effect. Sorry, I had to add that one in. It's much better in person. So it was a really interesting time. I joined this institution, took over a vet multimedia program that was delivering certificate 3 and 4 in multimedia for a region that spanned roughly 10 to 15 schools. And my predecessor had sort of taken the approach of, build it and they will come. This sort of field of dreams approach where if the program's good enough, then everyone will have a great time and learning will occur. And to some extent, that was true. We had state-of-the-art facilities that had been built up through the government funding we were receiving and other grants. We had real-world projects that we were setting students that reflected what was happening in the multimedia industry at the time. We had guests coming in from industry from my prior, work that I'd been doing as a designer, and connections through to work experience, which was really interesting. And as a group, we were pretty skilled and passionate trainers that were really into this, the field, but had come from doing the work and into training. But where it fell down, we started to see intermittent attendance. running a vet program as a part of a K-12 school had its challenges. And even though we were somewhat isolated from the rest of the high school and running large sessions, on afternoons with a big cohort, attendance was kind of patchy at times. Work submissions were a little bit mediocre, and effort, was waning, particularly when the students were busy. And we really saw that there was limited future pathways. Students sort of did the Cert 3 and 4, but then would end up, doing something completely different, and found it difficult to progress into another degree or to use those skills out in industry. And when we started to quiz the students about why this was happening or how they felt, quite frequently, and this was in quite an ad hoc way, we would hear that they were tired or exhausted. They had too much other work on. They were stressed out. They were sick and, hadn't really been feeling well. They had a fight with their friends. Or they just sort of felt a bit hopeless and thought, well, what's the point? It's not really going to do me any good. So let's move on. And it was, I think at that time, as a cohort of teachers, there was 3 of us running the program. We started to kind of reflect on what was going on, and all of those responses that we were gathering in an ad hoc fashion kind of came back to this idea of well-being. And while we didn't necessarily formalize it as a well-being approach and strategy, in reflection, I would say that that's squarely where we had landed. And so we began to start exploring these things with students in 6 kind of key areas. And Nick touched on some research that Melbourne Uni's done, which I think is fantastic, and it ties in with a lot of other work like self-determination theory and some really interesting approaches to learning. But where we found what we found most useful is starting to explore how students were feeling emotionally, how they thought they were progressing with their learning, and reflecting on that, how much effort they were putting in and why that was going up or down, how they were feeling physically, whether they were getting enough sleep. That was a big one. And even still talking to teachers these days in interviews, I still hear them say, sleep is a really big issue for students. How connected they felt in class, both with their peers, but also with us as trainers, and how stressed they were at any particular moment, and whether it was, their stress levels were actually conducive to doing good work, or whether we maybe should rethink the structure of the course. And to unpack some of those areas, sorry, my slides are having trouble keeping up. To unpack some of the areas, we were asking some really key questions, and you'll find these in Ziplet. We've sort of carried across a lot of the thoughts, and by no means, all that time ago, our questions were nowhere near as well crafted, but they were questions along the lines of, how are you feeling? How well did you understand today's lesson, or how are you progressing with your learning? How much effort have you put in? You're feeling okay? Did you get enough sleep? How supported do you feel? And how stressed are you about your workload? These are good questions to start with, and asking them consistently, we found that over time, we started to get a clearer picture of how our students were going and how we could influence and impact their outcomes. And what it helped us to do, these are some really interesting things. We started to pinpoint, students are quite stressed at this particular moment and leading up to a key milestone, maybe an assessment or a project. How do we mitigate that? Let's get together and talk to them, and actually as a group plan out what sort of mitigation strategies we might do. We were able to identify some individuals and groups that were at risk, both because of their external situation. It was not necessarily in our control, but we were able to then point them to support networks that help them. But we could also then be flexible with the deliverables we were asking for. And, thankfully we had that flexibility, but knowing that it was a concern meant that we could adapt to the needs of our students. We also found ways to connect the program to where the students wanted to be in the future. And this was a really critical one, I think, for the success of the program, was finding out, whether it was a further education, or whether it was work, or whether it was actually something sideways, a side interest that they were looking at doing, and they were developing skills to get there. All of those kind of things that related to how much effort they might put in, or how they felt they were progressing would impact the success and input that they had on the program. And we also discovered how to make things fun and engaging and enjoyable. And this resulted, and really, I mean, we were quite surprised at the time, but we doubled enrollments in the first 2 years of the program, which skyrocketed. We ended up having to get more trainers and build out the facilities even further. Academic achievement increased pretty significantly, and we started seeing big groups of students moving into further education once they finished our program, that previously was unattainable for someone straight out of high school, straight out of Year 12. And we were formally recognised as an exemplar for innovation and engagement. And I think, the assessors, when they came through the program and saw how we were touching base with students and trying to find out how we could accommodate them and go beyond, beyond the curriculum, into diving into their wellbeing and those different aspects of wellbeing, really made it stand out from what other providers were doing at the time. But it wasn't all roses, and this is definitely worth highlighting. And I think one of the things now that I'm excited about, and that keeps me awake at night and getting up early in the morning to work on Ziplet, is how we can solve some of these problems that I faced, back when I was a teacher. Frequently and consistently capturing data is hard work. It's time consuming, and it's really hard to scale. And then taking all of that data, making sure that it's in the right format, and analysing it is super time consuming. And often we found that the journey from collecting that data to then making a change was really not agile, and almost was too late. We were making the change for the next cohort at times. Some things we were quite quick about, but because of that lag in those first 2 points, it was not always that quick. And to be honest, not all students felt comfortable contributing to the process. And I think that was largely because of the process that we were using. We didn't have formal tools like Ziplet to use. We were having conversations, we were using paper rubrics, we were doing exit tickets, and some basic forms on a website. But beyond that, students don't always feel comfortable sharing things in person, so it made it a little bit more challenging. And fast forward to the magical world of tomorrow, which hint is today. And things have come a long way. We've now got Google Forms, we've got Quizlet and Formative, and Classroom and Teams, and all of the other great tools and software available to us. And technology as a platform and as a software springboard is ubiquitous in classrooms, or in a lot of classrooms, I should say. But some of those challenges do still exist. Trying to collect data in a consistent format, and be able to scale those questions and ask them frequently enough to make good decisions, particularly around wellbeing, is not always easy. And so that's where we really feel quite passionately about how we're shaping Ziplet and what we're trying to do, which is really give you a platform to monitor student wellbeing in a way that's manageable, that you can scale, and that's easy and simple to implement. And so what I want to do now, that's sort of my history of where we've arrived to. What I want to do is jump into Ziplet and show you how this looks in practice. And we're going to run through a couple of different scenarios. I will enlist your help to respond to a couple of those things. But we're going to touch on not only the mechanics of how to measure those sort of 6 key areas that I, as a group, we had identified within wellbeing, but also how you can use that to make decisions and maybe get a sense of how your students are going over time. So to start, what I thought it would be worth doing is setting up an initial question in my Ziplet class and getting some responses to that and sort of showing you how you can scale that to get a sense of how your students might be tracking, not just once, but over a period of time. And I think that was the biggest change for me when we started doing this with the multimedia program, was doing it frequently at key junctures and asking the same question and collecting the same data gave us a sense of whether students were going, were up, were down, more stressed, less stressed, whether they felt supported or felt less supported, and what we could do in response to that. So let me get a question set up. I'm going to base this question off one of our existing wellbeing questions. You can jump in here and feel free to use any of these. The one I'm using, I want to focus on stress as an initial marker, because I find that stress is actually a pretty key contributor to how committed students feel and how overwhelmed they can feel. But I'm going to modify this one just slightly, so that we're asking, how stressed do you feel about your workload right now? And you'll notice that our default template has a reaction, which is, how do you feel about your workload? Happy, sad, in between with text. I'm going to switch this to a scale. And there's a key reason for switching to scale that I'll talk a little bit about. But before I do, just going to modify our labels here. So not stressed and very stressed. And I've left text on. What I want to do is capture with the scale on a 1 to 7 scale, the student's level of stress and maybe a key word. How are you feeling? How would you describe that stress? And maybe, is there any key thing that you're worried about? And that's going to be optional, because it's not quite it's not as important to me, but it's something that it'd be great if students could share that. At the bottom here, I'm going to give students the ability to respond anonymously, which allows them, if they're feeling a little bit uncomfortable about the process, to be anonymous. It still means that I'll receive the feedback. I can see the score, and it contributes to how I can view the well-being of my class, but I can't pinpoint that particular student. And in reflecting on the experiences that I had through the multimedia program, that kind of anonymization can be quite powerful for students that don't necessarily always feel comfortable sharing sharing how they're going, or that might feel that there could be potential retribution as a result of their honesty. So I'll get that question asked. We've now got it set up in my certificate 3 and 4 in multimedia, but obviously it's not the early 2000s, and I don't have 100 odd students to go out to. So what I want each of you to do for me, and we're going to just spend 20 to 30 seconds doing this, is to be my students. I want you to navigate to ziplet.com/go and take this PIN number here, 451006. Enter your first name and respond to the question with this in mind. So it's the second week of term. We don't have any assignments yet. And the workload seems okay. Everyone's just finding their feet, and we haven't really dug into the bulk of the course. We're just sort of settling in and getting to know one another. I want you to put yourself in that mindset. jump on to ziplet.com/go and quickly respond. And maybe in the text, just give me a one-word emotion that you're feeling right now. I'll give you 20 seconds or so to respond to that. And please, if you need a hand, drop a question into the chat.
The link and code is also in the chat if anyone needs to grab it from there as well.
Oh, fantastic. Incidentally, copying and pasting the code into the pin response on ziplet.com/go is probably the quickest and easiest way of entering that pin. Oh, fantastic. I've got 5 responses already. You are all very fast. So let's go in and have a look. As I said, I talk a little bit about scale and why I switched from reaction to scale. And I like scale for a couple of reasons. Scale it's really easy to interpret and compare. You've kind of got some really good meters on either end that you can see where people are at. But you can also measure it over time, and you can see how that has progressed over time. And so looking at the data that we've collected, you can see there's actually a bit of a spread. You know, we've got a number of people down the bottom. They're not feeling overly stressed. Oh, there's another person who's joined the not overly stressed end. We do have a couple of people that are stressed. I'd be interested to see who what they might say, and I'm hoping those students might have actually said, "Hey, you know, this is why I'm feeling particularly stressed." On the right-hand side here, we can start to see a bit of a word cloud forming, which is great. You know, you can see some key things that students are saying. If you're asking for a particular bit of feedback or topic, that'll pinpoint those words, but quite powerful. And I can scan down and touche. I can see some of the things that people are saying, which is fantastic. So what I want to do now is just show you, this is a single snapshot, and it's a really great way with Ziplet to kind of get a sense of, okay, how stressed am I feeling, my students feeling right now? What's the go, and how do I put my finger on the pulse? But where this becomes even more powerful is by asking this question again over time. So I've asked the question in week 2 and got a bunch of responses. I can see that, you know, a number of people are feeling pretty good about things. A number of people are feeling a little bit apprehensive and a little bit stressed, but not too bad. If I then go to my options and ask again, what that does is it allows me to send the question out to students again and then capture a second set of responses. And this is where the power of both asking a question multiple times and using the scale response type gives you the ability to track that data over time. So what I want each of you to do now is go quickly back into ziplet.com/go with the same PIN number and respond to that question one more time for me. This time, what I want you to imagine is that it's week 6 or 7. We've now got 3 or 4 assignments due. You've also got 2 other classes that have competing assignments due, and everything is kind of really piling on. And as a teaching cohort, I've been a little bit absent and maybe not providing quite as much support. So with that in mind, jump back in and quickly do an additional couple of responses. I'll just give you another 10 seconds or so to get those in. Nick, make sure you get your response in, please.
Yes, sir, all done.
Nice. All right, so let's jump back in. I've got a heap of responses coming through, which is fantastic. I can see that my scale is really starting to get quite top heavy. A lot of students are feeling quite stressed, and that's a really good a good gauge for me. At a glance, I can look at this and say, hey, there's something I need to do. I need to maybe have a catch up with people individually, maybe set up some additional supports or additional sessions, something along those lines. But there's a couple of really powerful things now that I've asked this question twice. There's a couple of really powerful things that I can do. I can look at the average over time, and I can see that between these two junctures, the two rounds of questioning, when I first asked that question and now the next time I've asked it, there's been a significant increase. And this is a really, really interesting way. If you're asking that question each week, for example, across a 10-week term, you can see how stress levels might peak and trough. Maybe they correlate with when assignments are due for submission. Maybe it correlates with the amount of work that students have in other classes, or potentially with some of the support that they're getting from their peers or from yourself as an educator. What I can also do is start to pinpoint some areas for follow-up. So I might be able to just click on my very stressed people, and that will then filter my latest round, and I can see Matthew, Camille, and a student who's currently anonymous is really feeling it, and maybe I'll go and follow up with them to see if they need some additional support, or what else I can do to help them out. And so what I'm going to do is one more round. I'm going to ask this question again, and now we're at week 10. And yes, I'm sorry. Again, I'm going to get you to respond. This is the last time, I promise. But imagine now we're in week 10 of the semester. I've been running some additional outside of class tutorials and workshops for those students who need some extra support. We've also got in an extra tutor who's helping students to work through some of the challenges. And a couple of those other classes, their submissions are done and gone. So even though we have a reasonably big project that we're working on, there's not quite so many other competing priorities within the students' lives. So if you can, with that in mind, jump in and provide one final response for me, that would be fantastic. And we'll just do a quick 10 to 15 second wait while we collect those responses. You can see them quickly ticking up. There's a really nice thing about Ziplet as well, using it live in class with students as you're working with them. You can see the responses coming in. I do speak to a number of teachers who quite frequently use the word cloud to spark discussions at the start of classes or during a class. And they take live polls, which is a really nice way of using those charts. Awesome. Well, look, I've got 9 new responses. I might jump in and take a look at how that's looking. And we're starting to get a healthier spread. We do still have some people who are stressed. We can see, hey, better is our #1 word at the minute. Good, pretty. We can sort of draw some conclusions there. But the thing that I'm really interested in is looking at the average view. And we can see that the start of term, there was a little bit of stress that really started to peak up in the middle of that period. But now it's dropped right off. And I think as an educator, reflecting on the strategies that I've implemented, the changes that I've made in the class, this is a really good way of quickly gauging whether they've taken effect and whether they've had an impact, and how much influence, to Nick's point earlier, how much influence I'm having on the well-being of my students. So this is one really powerful way of using scale and asking questions over time to track well-being. And what I'm going to do very briefly is jump into a class that I already have a number of responses for. So no more responding from everyone. You can see I've got 227 here, and I have a few live questions going. Also, you might notice that this particular class is a Connect class rather than a Go class, which I was using previously. So the Go class that you've all just been responding to doesn't require student accounts, and you simply need the PIN to respond. As super quick, super easy to dive in and get feedback from students. The one disadvantage, though, that the Connect class does have is that because students are logging in to respond to your questions, you can then message them and have a two-way conversation about their responses. And that added power of being able to connect with students after they've provided feedback is a really important step. So a couple of quick things that I want to talk about with Connect classes. Connect classes operate much the same, but one key difference is that we've built in some ways to automate that process. So you would have noticed I've been asking that question again, and each time I ask it, I've got to go in and set that up. And it's a really good way of seeing my data over time, but it still requires a little bit of manual intervention. In a Connect class, you can ask a question again, or when you initially ask the question, you can actually set this up. But what it also gives you is the ability to repeat that question. And I can set this up to repeat weekly, fortnightly, monthly. I could actually repeat it every day. How are you feeling today? Or did you get enough sleep? Would be an example of how you might do that. And I can repeat that weekly and, maybe do that for the 12 weeks of term. And that will set it up and automate that process for me. So I don't need to keep asking the question. It'll prompt students and send them a reminder each week to say, hey, please respond to this question. And then as an educator, really all you need to do is log back in and review the responses and adapt the classroom and the teaching practice to that. It's a very quick and simple way of starting to capture that data over time. So in this particular example, we've asked how supported our students have been feeling in the class. Again, you can kind of see the values, the range of values that we've collected, and we have been collecting this over 5 or 6 different junctures, 5 or 6 weeks. So if I then go into average view, I can see, from the start of term across that period, it's slowly been climbing. We've been, introducing some new measures and doing different things to really increase how students feel about that level of support. If I wanted to dig into this a little bit deeper, I could filter my responses and actually target a specific time period. So, maybe I just want to have a look at the very first, like right at the start, where people were feeling a little low, what was going on there, and we can see in that first week of term, a few students were a bit unsure. It's the start of term. We don't really know one another, and so forth. And filtering gives you the ability to really hone in on individual students and how they're going. But with this particular question, what I find really powerful is when you start to pair these questions together. So we talked a little bit about and demonstrated how stressed do you feel about your workload. We now have this particular question: how supported do you feel in the class? And that support, if I just clear my filters, sorry. That support, we can see how that's changed across the period. if I then also pair that with how much effort are you putting in, this is where things start to get really interesting. And in the wellbeing space, I think, as Nick highlighted, there's so many different factors that all kind of overlap one another and play a really integral part in academic success and, student wellbeing, that looking at them in isolation is quite difficult. But when I start to capture them using a scaled question over time with the same time periods, I can start to see some trends. And maybe this is some anecdotal trends for now, but it at least gives me a starting point as an educator to explore. So thinking about the how supported do you feel? We did notice a trend up across the quarter. This one, how much effort? We had students dipping a little bit, and then maybe as we started to support them, run additional workshops or provide materials, the effort has increased as well. And, that might be something that we look at changing for future, in future classes where we provide some additional supports for students. So there's one last thing that I want to highlight as a really key feature that's quite powerful before we give you a bit of a sneak peek into a few things that are coming down the pipeline from the product team, and we open it up to questions. And that's really what happens next. So we've collected all of this data. I've started to see some trends between maybe support and effort, and support and effort and stress. But what do I do next? And I think one of the really key things for me is saying, well, let's actually support the students who need it the most right now. And what you can do is use your filters. So I'm going to filter by the latest round. So the last time I asked this question, and I just want the lowest responses. So the students who are not putting in as much effort as everyone else. Sorry. So what we want to do is filter by these students, maybe up to actually even 4 is probably okay, middle of the road. So just a 1 and a 2 and a 3. And I can see now the responses that I have are only those students that have replied 1, 2, and 3. And as a follow-up, I can quickly reply to those students and say, hey guys, I can see that you've not been putting in quite as much effort. Let's catch up and talk about your broader workload. And it gives me a very quick and easy way of following up with groups of students that are, maybe feeling a similar vibe, or that I'm noticing some similar trends. Of course, I can message each of those students individually, and that'll create an individual stream. And it's worth highlighting that all of these messages, replies, and the student responses are all personal to you and the student. No, the students can't see anyone else's responses or replies. It's just really a shortcut for pushing those out. So look, that's kind of coming towards the end of where we're at with the current product, and some of the really interesting tools that we've got available at the moment in Ziplet for supporting and interrogating and monitoring wellbeing, and then following up on that. But what I wanted to do very quickly is showcase 2 small features that we're working on that we think will enhance this even further. So you would notice that this question, how do you feel about your workload right now? I've set this up as a reaction. We have a word cloud as well, and we have a number of students, a bit of a range of students that are feeling, everything from pretty unhappy or a little bit overwhelmed through to pretty excited. So one feature that we're working on at the moment that will be delivered out by mid-year is the ability to quickly respond and acknowledge those students. So I can see here this anonymous student has said, hey, I'm pretty good, pretty close to finishing. And, it doesn't necessarily require me to message that student or follow up with something typed. I might just want to celebrate that. And so I can click on the like button, decide to, hey, let's celebrate, you're almost done, and add that. And that'll notify the student and say, hey, your instructor has congratulated that last feedback. I might reconsider that and say, actually, celebration might not necessarily be the right term. Let's just pat them on the back and say, great work, and give them a gold star. It's classic education gold star, but nonetheless, we thought it was valuable. And for me, in speaking to a lot of teachers, that idea of just acknowledging that the students are contributing to this process of dialogue about wellbeing is a really powerful tool in itself. You don't necessarily need to reply with all of the answers or sophisticated copy. Just hey, thanks for the feedback, we'll do something about it is quite often enough. The second kind of key change that we're looking at making is neatening up how you can control who you reply to and being able to curate groups to reply to. And we've got this select all, which allows me to just simply select all of the students that are visible at the moment. I can then go in and say, hey, actually, I've already replied to this anonymous student with a like and said, great work. I don't need to reply to them, but everyone else, let's get a quick response out to, hit reply, throw in some text. Hey, everyone, we're going to run an additional session tomorrow at 9. Be great if you could drop by, and send. And now I've quickly followed up with the rest of my cohort. If I had filtered that data by people who are feeling a little anxious or, maybe apprehensive about their workload, or people who are super excited, that would make it quite specific. So these are two, great features that take that even further, and we hope will speed up the way that you can respond to students and complete that cycle of checking in on their well-being and then making some change as a result of that. Nick, have we got any questions that you would love to share and that we should dig into? I'm just conscious of time. We've got 5 minutes left.
Nicholas sent through a couple of functional questions, which were really awesome, and actually some good product feedback for the product team, but also a couple of things which are on the roadmap as well. So for everyone's benefit, if you haven't seen the Q&A, a couple of small things like when looking at rounds of questions, having the date so that you can quickly remember when you asked a question, for example, or the ability to set up a question, but then duplicate it and apply it to another class that you might be teaching as well. So for that duplication piece, I know it's something that a number of teachers have asked about in the past, and is definitely high on CAM's product roadmap at the moment. So stay tuned for that, because again, from a scale and a time and efficiency perspective, that's definitely something that will be coming to your accounts very soon. Aside from those questions from Nicola, as Cam mentioned, we do have a couple of minutes left. So if anyone would like to hop off mute, if you have a question, or feel free to type one out into the Q&A box. Now's the opportunity to ask us any burning questions.
While we do that, Nick, it might also be worth highlighting. We are working on a feature to ask questions of multiple classes. So, you can send the one question out to multiple classes. In the meantime, you do have the ability to favorite questions. Adding a question to your favorites then allows you to use that. Oh, actually, I'm sorry. I'm in our test environment on this one, which doesn't use favorites. But having a question in your favorites allows you to pick it whenever you ask a question. So it kind of stores it as a saved question.
Yeah, the favorites is definitely a handy little tool there as well. So Nicola, to your question, hopefully that does help you out for the time being as well. If there aren't any questions, it looks like a few people might need to jump off for end of day or any other meetings. We might wrap up at this moment right on time. So thank you everyone for joining today. I hope you did find this informative. If you have been using Ziplet for a little while, hopefully Cam's demonstrations highlighted a couple of ways that you can be thinking about maybe layering questions or using some different features of Ziplet to help you get that next layer of insight and understanding about your own students as well. We will be running these on a regular basis, so do keep your eyes peeled on your inboxes, and we'll keep invites coming your way as we keep these up and running. But again, thank you for joining, and feel free to drop any questions that might come to mind later on through to help@ziplet.com. Otherwise, enjoy the rest of your evening.
And Nick, before we wrap up, we do have a little Ziplet Go class set up for webinar feedback. We would love to hear from you what you thought about the webinar and what you would love to learn more about next. On screen at the moment is the PIN code for that. Simply go to ziplet.com/go and enter the PIN 586702. And there's two simple questions there that'd be great if you could respond to.
Awesome. Thanks for that reminder, Cam. Very important.
That's okay. Thanks for attending, everyone. We really appreciate it, and yeah, love sharing this stuff with you, and look forward to seeing you next time.
Cool. Thanks very much.